All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you so much for joining us. If you did not hear as you join us, if you would just say hello to us in the chat box. And just a little bit of webinar etiquette. We are going to keep everyone muted and to keep the distractions down in the background. You will see a poll pop up once or twice during the presentation, so we really like you to stay tuned to that and pay attention to that. You will notice at the bottom that there are Q&A box, and so as Kristen goes through her presentations, as you think of questions, if you would go ahead and put those in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring those and sharing those with Kristen as well. So if you are not familiar with Community Strong, we want to welcome you again. We are commissioned by BJC St. Peter's and Progress West, the Economic Development Center of St. Charles County, SSM of St. Charles County, Mercy Health, and St. Luke's to help have an impact on certain health outcomes in St. Charles County. So we're so thankful for all of them supporting us for events like this. We've been hosting a series of webinars centered around the topic of resilience. So when COVID began impacting St. Charles County and it felt like the sky was falling, our team got together and we asked, what could Community Strong offer as a resource that wouldn't add to the noise, that wouldn't add to the confusion, and that everyone would benefit from? And this concept of resilience emerged. And this idea of intentionally developing skills and attitudes that enable us to bounce back and to overcome adversity and crisis. So to get started, I want to introduce you to Kristen Ernst. She is the Director of Grief Services for Baue Funeral Homes and the Center for Hope and Healing. Kristen has years of experience working with hospice patients and their families, and she contributes as a specialist in grief support and bereavement in a private practice, as well as facilitator and educator in the community. She has previous experience working with survivors of childhood abuse and trauma, and has also dedicated her work to suicide prevention and awareness. Kristen loves being a people's advocate and helping them develop those skills to cope with grief, and just creating very safe and conducive environments for people to empower themselves to a better quality of life. So welcome, Kristen, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I am so delighted to be here, and I'm honored actually to be a part of this series. So I want to start with, I'm going to pull this up and we're all, I'm going to share screen. Hang on. There we go. All right. She asked me to talk about caregiver fatigue. And so what I wanted to first address is, who are the caregivers and what does that look like? And so we're gonna do a couple things in the next hour, but I really want to invite everyone that as we're talking to not only, I don't want this to be a complete lecture. If you guys have questions or suggestions, or I would much rather this be a discussion about how to help each other in an authentic way. So this is the goal in the next hour, is that we talk about what a caregiver is, the way we look at it in a traditional sense, but also what caregivers are right now. And then I also want to explain the grief associated with the pandemic and how do we really address it and work through it. And then we're going to give some practical and authentic ways. That's the real goal, is to honor your feelings and work through this crisis. And then I'm hoping if we haven't had any questions, that we'll address those at the end if we haven't had them throughout. All right. So these are a little bit of my qualifications. I, just want to let you know that I went back later in life and got my master's degree in counseling. I have an undergraduate degree in marketing and communication. And then I've been working with bereaved families in hospice for a long time, and worked at Life Crisis Services. So when you look at that resume or whatever, you look at it and go, she knows how to deal with sad, that's for sure, right? So I do a lot of sad stuff in my work, and then balancing my children, and I know that everybody is doing that right now. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm in the trenches with you as well, and want to figure out, this is a work in progress. I feel like I'm always a work in progress, and we've never arrived. So what I am suggesting today are things that I know have worked for me and work in my practice, as well as work with other clients. But if you have some suggestions as well, I will really want to invite that. So what is a caregiver? So this is the Collins Dictionary, English edition. Oh yeah, we're going to do this too. We're going to do a survey. So if you guys would actually, as I'm talking about this and what a caregiver is, if you could let us know how tired and overwhelmed you felt since the COVID crisis, and let us know how it's impeded upon your work and your daily life. 10 being the most stressed, 1 being you're cool as a cucumber. So if you guys could fill out that poll for us, I would greatly appreciate it. And as you guys are filling that out, I'm going to talk about what a caregiver actually is. So as I said, a caregiver is someone who is taking care of another person. That's a Collins English dictionary. But what does that look like? It can be a parent or a guardian. A lot of times it's an educator. Mental health, you're seeing a big influx in mental health issues. I know that we've talked about domestic violence is up 30%, and there is a lot of depression and anxiety going on. So mental health counselors are seeing a lot. I can tell you I'm seeing a lot in my practice right now. Clergy, of course, is another way of caretaking. First responders, and I put this in here. A lot of people don't understand what we talk about when we say last responders. These are funeral directors and embalmers and people that are working in the funeral home. And as an employee, a proud employee of Baue, I want to give a shout out to my coworkers who have seen the brunt of this crisis. So I want to acknowledge them too. But at the end, I want to say that everyone at this point is a caregiver. And I don't know about you, but sometimes it just takes a lot of energy to take care of yourself. And I was kind of joking around with the team earlier that if you can take care of a succulent, you're a caregiver right now. So I want you to know that we're going to really try and address everyone today as how do you manage that stress? How do you work through it? All right. So it looks like it looks like the masses are at 44% at 7. So that's a lot. That's a huge increase in stress. So hopefully through this presentation and through us sharing this time together in the next hour that we can figure out some authentic and practical ways for you to manage your stress a little bit better because we're all caregivers. So a lot of people this is kind of a new concept, but we're really diagnosing and telling people that this is what we're experiencing right now is a lot of grief. Grief about job loss and our kids not being able to graduate and proms, and more than anything, I think that we're really grieving the fragility of life and recognizing we can't go see our grandparents in the nursing home, or we can't go visit those people that are immunosuppressed. So I think it's really important to recognize what you're experiencing is grief. And then what do we do about it? Once we name it, how do we get through it? I think it's really important too to recognize that anybody that's on the front line, whether you are working in the grocery store or you're considered quote unquote essential, there's a lot of vicarious traumatization that's happening, meaning they're hearing a lot of stories and a lot of things, and we're all experiencing it together. But I think it's really important that we recognize that as we are dealing with something that's actually post-traumatic, there's a real opportunity for post-traumatic growth right now. So how do we do that? I hope that this becomes a discussion today, but we're gonna dive right in, okay? So I want to talk a little bit about the differences between grief and mourning. So grief is the internal emotions that are always happening from the moment that you wake up to the moment you go to bed. And a lot of times we say that these are, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talked about these, the denial and the shock, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Those are the 5 stages of grief that it was about 5 stages of dying when she did it. And people have translated it into a grief journey. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But mourning is the actual tasks that help you know that this has been witnessed, that this grief has been witnessed. And in a real traditional sense, that's why we have funerals. That's part of why we have funerals, is to recognize that our grief has to be shared and witnessed together. So, without these tasks of mourning, people tend to stay in the same place. And so as we're mourning, I think that a lot of times it's just important to recognize that we have to give a voice to it. And as we're giving a voice to it, that's actually a task that we're doing. I want to address the denial, shock, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance part of this. A lot of times people look at that and ask, well, what, if I'm in shock about this pandemic, or they'll want to say, what stage am I in? And I want to just kind of clear up the falsity about that when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross put these together, she did not mean for them to be linear. So it's something that a lot of times we go through all kinds of emotions, and they're all going on at the same time. And so it's really important to recognize that as we're going through this, it's not a linear journey. And these things that I've listed here, they're descriptive about your emotions, but not prescriptive. In other words, if you aren't angry, that's okay. But if you are angry, we want to normalize that and recognize that that's a common emotion when you're experiencing grief. So I hope that clears that up, because I don't want people to think that, oh, if I'm in the bargaining stage and I'm wishing that I had more time, to take care of something, that I can't be angry at the same time. I hope that makes sense. So this is from Dr. Alan Wolfelt. He runs a Center for Loss in Colorado, and I've studied under him for a long time. And he has talked about the six tasks, say that a lot, of mourning. And he actually came out with something recently that we've been sharing on the Baue Facebook page about how to face the pandemic. So a lot of this is coming from him and me kind of putting my own spin on it as well. But I want to give a shout out to Dr. Alan Wolfelt, as he's been really helpful in helping the funeral industry as well as people that are grieving during this time, during this pandemic. So the first one is that we have to acknowledge the reality of this pandemic and acknowledge that there is grief involved. So if you are dealing with something, whether it be that your son is not able to graduate, or that you're not able to have a wedding, I can't tell you how many times people have called recently about, I feel like I've had so many losses. One practical way, obviously, is that we're trying to educate people about that and let people know that's a common feeling that's going among society right now. But we also want people to know there's a couple interventions that I do in my practice that I would like people to know about that might help. So a lot of times in private practice, I'll have people do a loss line. And a loss line is you'll start at birth and go to the age that you are actually right now. And it's almost like a bar graph where you'll name the losses that you've had. And sometimes we have to recognize that loss isn't just death. Loss is job loss, a divorce, loss. Even I have people come to me all the time when they've retired and they have a loss of identity and they don't recognize that they're dealing with grief. And so I have people do a loss line where they do a bar graph and then they rate actually how big the loss actually feels. And so sometimes you'll recognize that, when you were 6, you lost a grandparent, and maybe that's not a huge loss, but then you moved when you were 10 and you lost all your friends. That was a really big loss. I think it's really important right now to that's a practical way of sitting down and looking at all the losses you've had recently and going, so there's almost kind of like this self-compassion and this grace that you go, well, I guess I am dealing with a lot and I didn't even realize how much I'm dealing with. So that's number one. That's the first task of mourning, is that we have to acknowledge what we've been through the pandemic and in your grief. The second one is to honor all of your feelings. I think that we have a really grief avoidant society. And by that, I mean, we really try to avoid negative feelings. No different than when somebody tells us something really awful and then we try and package it up and put a silver lining on it. And that really makes them feel unheard. So I think it's important for us to recognize the good, the bad, and the ugly, acknowledge that, if we're angry, that we can state it. So many times we've recognized that anger is an emotion that has all these negative connotations to it, because when people are angry, they do maladaptive things. And so if we recognize that we can honor anger, and that's something that we can actually do without doing a maladaptive coping skill, it's a good thing. Anger always moves. I always say that anger moves us to action, and anger is a feeling that usually has sadness or fear underneath it. So something to think about. When I say this in grief groups all the time, Albert Ellis used to say, don't should all over yourself. And you have to be really careful how you say that, first of all. But the thing about shoulding is that we always say, I don't know, how many times I've heard people say, I shouldn't be feeling this way. Or how many times you say, well, you should do this. And in this pandemic, it's really important to recognize that we have to get rid of our shoulds and recognize what we are and honor all of those feelings. The other thing too is that it's really important to recognize that emotions are not logic. And so we try and logic our ways out of our emotions all the time. And if there's one thing that I could get across to you today is emotions are never wrong. And so let's honor those. Let's honor those emotions. It's important too to get those. If you look at the base word, or if you look at emotion, the base word is motion. And so it's important to take those emotions and get them to move. And how do we do that? We speak them, or we write them, or we put them into existence. It's time to get our emotions into motion. So. I love this quote. This is from Brene Brown, who I consider a real mentor, and she does a lot of work around shame. But I think I love this because it's like we have to embrace our imperfections in this crisis, right? And I think there's a lot of people that are out there that are struggling for perfectionism, and it's just not going to happen right now, as if it was ever going to happen. But it says, you are imperfect, you are wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging. And so I try and get that across, not only in grief groups, but hopefully today in this time that we have together, that we're all here for a reason. And I hope there's something that you can take that is long lasting. So number 3 is practice gratitude. So how do we do that? How do we practice gratitude? We have to, sometimes it's much more internal. I think that we're looking at, maybe journaling, or maybe that comes through prayer or song. A lot of times that comes through meditation. I'm going to give you some mindfulness techniques later on, and it's in a later slide, but I think it's important to practice what we're really thankful for during this time. I actually had a session earlier this morning, and the gentleman was talking about how he has been really stressed out at work, and how I guess he just shouldn't. He said, he used the should. He said, I guess I really shouldn't feel that way, because I just feel lucky that I have a job right now. And I said, you know what? It sounds like you're really thankful. It sounds like you're really thankful that you are still employed, but it's still okay to voice that you're really stressed out too. We have to have that balance. I think it's really important. And we can't just practice gratitude so much that we totally, disregard the feelings that we're having. So the other part too of this is that I really want people to be kind to themselves. We as caretakers tend to be really good to other people and not so good to ourselves. I don't know if I would really like if people could chime in and be like, yeah, preach, Kristen. I hear what you're saying, because I think it's important to recognize that a lot of times we judge ourselves way harsher than we judge others. And so I think it's important for us right now to recognize that we have to be kind to ourselves. And what does that look like? Not only does that mean that we have to nurture our bodies and our souls, but we just have to, the one thing about grief that I have learned is that grief causes us to slow down. It is a natural way for our bodies to slow down. And that's what's happened in this pandemic. We have seen people really have to slow down. We're not as busy. We don't have the normal distractions that we have to kind of keep our minds busy. So we have to be kind to ourselves when we're slowing down like that. It's a lot. I always tell people in session, this is a lot of time to be alone with your emotions. A lot of people are not used to that. So we have to really practice self-compassion. So I love this slide. I actually just went and got some coffee prior to our meeting here. But so much of our society in the past was all about productivity. And not to say that we can be an idle society, that doesn't work either. But we have to recognize that our productivity isn't based on our self-worth, and vice versa. So part of that is getting plenty of rest and recognizing that I really want to, we talk about in mental health about self-care all the time. And honestly, I don't think that there's enough, even in graduate programs, about how to do this in a practical and authentic way, because self-care almost seems like, oh, man, I got to do self-care. And it should be one of these things that just like comes naturally. Hopefully, I just said the word should, but I'm hoping that it becomes something just part of our routine. Get moving is, we talk so much about health and wellness, but really more than anything, I want that to be intentional, and having a safe place to express your emotions. I think that's really valid. I can tell you that I've had an experience where I've always looked up to my dad, and but he's a fixer. He is a caregiver. Like many of us who are caregivers, we are fixers. And a lot of times I would go to my dad as a young adult and say, Dad, I need to talk to you about this. And he would, and really I was just venting. I really wasn't needing, I wasn't needing a problem solved. I just needed to vent. And so later in life, as I've become old and wise, I have been able to tell my dad, hey, I need you to just listen and not give me advice. And my dad's been really respectful enough to say, like, when I've shared a story, he'll say, are you just venting, or are you wanting some feedback? And so we've both matured on those levels. I think that's really important to recognize that you have to have a safe place to express emotion, throughout this entire thing. It's really important. And I also think we don't even realize how much we're processing our grief. A lot of this is, we don't realize how much our day-to-day stuff is, it's a lot of work. And I want to share an example of, there was recently a colleague of mine that she was sharing with me the story, and she went to lunch, and she was talking to her friend about this wonderful book that she had read, and she couldn't think of the name. And this has all happened to us, right? And this is prior to Google, when you could just look something up. She could not think of the author, and it was driving her crazy. And so then she just was like, fine, forget it. And she filed away, right? And she went back amongst her day, did more work tasks, and then came home, fixed dinner. And as soon as she sat down and put that green bean in her mouth, she went, Nicholas Sparks, that's what it was. And I think that it's really interesting, because that's how our grief works. We think that we filed it away. We think that we're processing all the time in our subconscious. And so I think it's really important to recognize how much rest we need when that is happening. And I hope that, you guys are all, Nicholas Sparks. How many times have you tried to think of a band or think of something, and you can't think of it, and so you file it away, but it's really just up in the tab box, right? So I want you to recognize that your brain is processing all the time, even if you think you've shut it down. So number 5 for Alan Wolfeld's tasks of mourning is to search for meaning. And these are some ways that you can search for meaning. I think that we have to practice mindfulness. We have to stay present in the moment. I was just talking earlier to Carissa about, it's interesting how I've watched the series, and over just a few weeks, things have changed, and things continue to change. If I start to think too much about what's going to happen to my kid's school, or what is my private practice going to look like in 6 months, and how am I going to do groups, I start to like kind of spiral out and be like, oh my gosh, how is this all going to work? So I have to like take a moment and take a deep breath and go, okay, Kristen, this is what we know now, and this is how we're going to work with the now and the facts that we know. So I think it's really important to stay present during this time and try not to spiral out. I know that's easier said than done, but when you're being mindful, you can recognize that it's happening and try and rein it back in. I always say this: this is a good time to devote time to take care of your spirit, whether that's prayer or taking a long walk or getting out in nature. all of these things tend to help us reconnect with ourselves. So I have a couple examples that I'm going to tell you about, because practicing mindfulness, people have a hard time wrapping their brain around that. And so one thing that I do in practice is I get people to do a 2-minute drawing, and it's not the way it sounds. So I give people a piece of paper, and this is something that you could do with your families before dinner or after dinner. But sometimes even 2 minutes of mindfulness is hard. And so it is the reason why they call it practice is because you get better with time. It's just like any other skill, like yoga or a sports event, you have to practice. So you take a piece of paper and crayons, pencils, whatever you want, but you take 2 minutes and you draw in complete silence, set a timer, and draw with your non-dominant hand. So what that does is that sets off different neurons in your brain, and you have to super hyper focus on the task at hand. So, and that's really all mindfulness is no different than brushing your teeth and you feeling the sensation of the toothbrush on your teeth and feeling and tasting the mint and hearing it, using all 5 senses to kind of connect with what's exactly going on. How many times do we brush our teeth and we're thinking about what the day is going to look like, right? Practicing mindfulness is just paying attention to what you're doing. And so that's a great exercise to do with your family during this time, and say, okay, we're gonna try something new. We're gonna practice mindfulness and draw for 2 minutes with your non-dominant hand. It not only provides a little bit of laughter on what people's drawings look like, because I can't even draw with my right hand, much less my left, but it allows us to be quiet and really concentrate on the moment, stay present in the moment. All right. That's one way you can practice. I want to give you some other useful tips. I have the mindfulness coach app on my phone. There's so many apps about mindfulness out there, and you can even set a timer. Okay, I'm going to practice mindfulness for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and you can build your way up. No different than weightlifting. So you build your strength up. You got to build your brain up. So one thing that I really want to address is that during this time when we're searching for meaning and we're trying to connect with ourselves and connect with our families, it's not the best time to be connecting with social media and reading everything we can on COVID and everything. I have found that there are people that are kind of insatiable right now about information. And my guess is that their mental health is not the best right now, because there's a lot of anxiety and depression around all of that. So try and be mindful of how much you're observing and watching that, and stay away from it if you can. I always say that we need to get the information that we need, and then we need to turn it off. So one thing that my family has done that I have really enjoyed is that we have created playlists. I come home and I cook dinner, and as we're cooking dinner together, we're listening to music. It's a real way for us to connect and unwind and dance around and act silly. So we all need a bit of silly in our lives right now. And I'll say my daughter has created a playlist that says not born in your generation. And she created a whole playlist of music for me that's got all of the stuff that I was raised with, which I love. So try and create some playlists together. If that's a time where you guys can spend some time together as a family and dance around, we need that silliness. So the next slide is just a great quote about mindfulness and what it means. We just got to capture those moments. I personally, when I'm at Baue and I work at the St. Charles location mostly, that's where my office is, there's these beautiful, they just ended last week, but there's these beautiful tulips out there. And for me to drive up, before I'm going into a day of listening to a lot of sad, I try and take a deep breath, pay attention to those beautiful tulips and all the colors that are out there, and just kind of pause for a moment before I go into my day. So I would recommend trying to do that wherever you are, and whatever your work life looks like. All right. So the last one, I think it's really important to reach out to others that we recognize as caregivers, that we need help and support as well. so many times we become expert problem solvers as caregivers, and we have a hard time accepting support. We're really, really great at giving it, but accepting support is much greater challenge. And so we need to make sure that we're reaching out and letting people know when we need help. That looks different right now, obviously. I can say that my mom, when I'm working, is a great help to me, but because of everything, we've social distanced, and she hasn't been able to help me as much, or hasn't helped me at all, actually, and that's been really difficult. So I think it's really important that we figure out a support system. That might look like online support. Like I said, there's all kinds of Facebook groups out there, as well as, we have created some online support grief groups for people who have lost a loved one during this time. We've always had groups, and they always have come to our community center, but they can't right now. And so when we stopped having those, I just reached out to our managers and said, we've got to have something. And so I had to learn that kind of whole Zoom platform, and we've been having online groups. And what's been really amazing about it, and been a learning experience for me, is that we've had people that have come, that live in Florida, that live in, the outskirts of Columbia, Missouri, that have found this as a source of support for them and are logging in. So I think it's really important to try and search those out, find those sources of support that will be good for you. I know that David Kessler right now has a Facebook group that's actually devoted to support during this pandemic, and it has to do with grief during this pandemic, and he has speakers. And if you looked up David Kessler on Facebook, you'd be able to find it. It's a great resource. I think it's really important to recognize that because we are professional fixers, because we are professional problem solvers, we cannot fix this pandemic. We cannot fix our grief. And that's a really unnerving situation to sit in. So I want to recognize that you need some rest, and you need to probably pull back and understand that that's happening, and that's a frustrating feeling. And a lot of times, what I say in support groups and grief and in the private practice, that a lot of times your feelings, if you're frustrated that you can't fix something, your feelings come out sideways. In other words, you snap at your kids, or you get angry with a coworker, and it's really not about that stuff. It's really not about that person. It's more about what you're experiencing. And so that's when you have to kind of pull back and go, okay, what's really going on with my emotions right now, Kristen? Like, what am I really feeling? So a suggestion that I have for you guys is, this is an example of a support circle. So this is somebody that was in, this is a fictitious one, obviously, and somebody was in private practice, and Rachel was the client. And then these are Aaron, and was a sibling, and Mom and Bill and Smokey the cat, of course. What I want to show you guys is that as you guys, even if this would be a great activity to do as a family as well, that you guys recognize that these circles of support are what make you strong. As you kind of draw this, it looks like a tree. It looks like a very strong tree. And as you know, when we've had tornadoes here in Missouri, a lot of times it's those skinny trees that don't last the storm. And it's important to know that as we're in the storm, you have to have a strong tree. So it would be good for all of us, not just children, but all of us, to kind of list our supports and recognize too, I say this in group a lot, that we have a therapeutic third. So there is a third of people that are kind of neutral, third of people that are neutral in our journey. And then there's a third of people that are actually detrimental, that actually make us feel like junk. And I would recommend avoiding them right now. And then there's this actual third therapeutic help that comes in and is really authentic in helping us in our journey. And so it would be good to include your therapeutic third and your support circle, and then show your kids and show yourselves how you can be a strong tree.
Hey, Kristen, there's a question that's popped up that I think would be good to share, to ask you. time period. So this was more through the lens of people who are going through recovery of substance use disorder and people who care for them. So how can they be a resilient caregiver for someone who is in recovery and have those ideal personal boundaries? So you talk about the kind of three groups that you have, but we know that one of those is usually kind of detrimental for us. You have those general boundaries of people that you do need and blocking out the people that you don't need, and particularly through a substance use disorder lens.
Yeah, so with some substance abuse disorder, I think that we have to look at, if we're the caregiver for somebody that is dealing with that, we can't take on their, they carry this backpack. I always say that we carry these backpacks around, and our backpack is ours to own, and but we can't take someone else's backpack off of them. And so it's really important to recognize that we have to, we can't take that on for them. There's, like you said, Carissa, there's personal boundaries that we can draw from, and we have to recognize, okay, I can only do these certain things for this person. And then once that ends, it's their journey, it's their fight. And that's a really hard thing when we love people that are going through addiction. That's a really difficult thing to do. None of this stuff is easy. None of this stuff is easy, but it's really important for us to carry our own backpack and not take someone else's on, especially if they don't want to give it up, especially if they don't want to give it to us. You know, that expression of making sure that you have your oxygen mask securely on before you start putting oxygen masks on everyone else is really important. And we just have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves in every way we can, and then creating those personal boundaries. I hope that answers the question, Krista. So I'm going to talk about what that looks like. It's a perfect time because we're going to segue into what does self-care actually look like for people, because, and I'm going to start with what it's not, right? So many times people think that self-care is chocolate and bubble baths, and not that I don't like those things. Don't consider me a hater on a chocolate and bubble baths, but it's really not what self-care is. I heard this great expression not too long ago about how self-care is, let me back up. We are washing our hands a lot and hand sanitizing our hands a lot. And I don't know about you, but my hands have become really, really dry. And so it's something that I have carried with me just as much as I've carried hand sanitizer and making sure that I'm, using hand sanitizing duties. I carry lotion with me. Lotion is like this balm for my hands that soothes the cracks and soothes the skin. And that's really what self-care is for the soul. So I want to make sure that you guys are using self-care as a lotion for your soul. So we're gonna go ahead and do our poll and talk about, do you feel like there's been some practical solutions to relieve your stress right now? And I can't vote, so it's telling me I can't vote. So if you guys could answer that as we're talking. But I think what, as you guys are answering that, I think what has happened is self-care used to look like a lot of things. It used to look like, getting our nails done and doing pedicures or whatever, and all those things have gone away for now. And the bottom line is we have to dig deeper. We have to dig deeper. So I've been telling people, we've got to figure out self-care solutions. So dig out your shovels. We're gonna try and figure out some things. A lot of times, I would say that self-care looks like cutting out toxic people. Recognizing that you don't have any reserve right now, that there's a lot going on, and giving yourself permission to just be with people that are soothing to your soul versus creating that friction like sandpaper on those really dry hands. We have to recognize that we have to conserve our resources. So conserving them means that, it's okay. I was talking to a client earlier, talking about he was a little distressed because he's working 10 hours days. His wife is working 10-hour days. and they have a young child. And he said, it's a little frustrating to see how everyone else is doing laundry, or I'm sorry, everyone is doing all these house projects and we can't even get laundry done. And so I think it's important to recognize that we're all not in the same boat, even though we're trying to, do our part. A lot of times it's just about maybe getting one load of laundry done, and that's okay. That should be celebrated. We're me coming home and trying to fix dinner and get it cleaned up, that we celebrate that. That to me, that is like, okay, that's all that has to get done today. And that's not, for anybody that knows me, that's not a typical day of Kristen. So I think at this point you just have to let some things go, and that's okay. We have to conserve. So what was the do we have a result on the, oh good, I'm glad you guys feel like there's been some practical and authentic solutions for stress. Do you guys have any other questions or discussion?
So there are been some other questions that have come not through the chat box, but to me. So one of them is, what can we do to recognize that we're not taking care of ourselves? I say it's not easy to self-recognize when you're in caretaker mode. So what are some symptoms? What are some things to look for? You think that you're taking care of yourself, but you're not.
Mm-hmm. So we talk a lot about this in our grief groups about how there are actually symptoms in your body that grief does that we don't even recognize. A lot of times we get really dehydrated easily, and we won't recognize, I feel dehydrated right now, by the way, but we won't recognize that we're dehydrated because we haven't really connected to our bodies. That's a practice that we have to ensue, and that it's not like something that you arrive at. It's something that you have to work on. When you recognize that you're dehydrated, maybe you put in a goal of saying, okay, I'm gonna bring this jug of water, and I'm gonna make sure that I drink this before noon, because a lot of times we don't recognize that we're so busy. We've got like all of those tabs open in our brain that we're not really connecting to our bodies. And so I think with recognizing, part of that is practicing the mindfulness. Even 2 minutes, you can recognize like, oh, I didn't realize that like I'm having hunger pain. I'm having hunger cues, and I wasn't even paying attention to that before. So I think practicing mindfulness, and then also, kind of opening that window of tolerance and recognizing that you can, okay, I was so busy with work. How many times have you gone through your whole workday and not eaten a thing because you were just so busy? You didn't even feel hunger. So I think that during this time, it's something that we have to practice and recognize that it's not going to come easy, but the more you practice it, the better you become at it.
Kristen, I can see from the chat box and just text that I'm getting your comments about the toxic people in our life. Is that really resonated with people? And I think as people who are caregivers by profession or caregivers just by personality, there's a lot of guilt with trying to separate toxic people, and that we are professional fixers. So I don't know if there's some tips or some guidance you can have specifically on the toxic people in our life, and maybe how we're actually caregiving for them by asking them to leave our lives, or how we're taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, or how we recognize that we can't fix them, right? Like we can't fix them, and they I have noticed, even in my children aren't toxic. That's not where I'm going with this, but I've noticed that when I start to draw personal boundaries and I don't come in and rescue my children, they also learn something as well in that process, and they rise up to the occasion, right? So many times we think that, well, we've got this, and we come in and we rescue all the time as caregivers. And when we recognize that we can't save everybody, that's something that we can say, okay, and I'm not saying shut them out completely, but maybe I think as far as the toxicity, I think in some practical ways, I can't tell you how many people I have unfollowed on Facebook right now, and I haven't defriended them. There's like Facebook differences, right? Haven't defriended them because I'm like, I just can't. That's not a positive energy that I need right now. and they're not giving this positive energy off right now. So I'm going to just unfollow them so that it doesn't show up in my feed all the time. That's one way that I'm not being a jerk. And then I'm also still kind of protecting myself, like kind of insulating myself and using it as a bubble. I hope that's like a real practical way, but I think that there's other ways. Obviously, if you're doing this in your job, you know, if we're caregivers in our profession, we tend to take work home no matter what. But I have been really cognizant of making sure that ride home from the car, you know, in the car to going and being a caregiver at home has been very intentional. I make sure that I listen to music that makes me laugh, that makes me sing at the top of my lungs, that I have the windows down, especially right now because it's so beautiful out. Like that time, I soak it up as much as I can, because that toxicity really drains us. And so, you know, obviously we can't always cut the toxic people out of our workplace and all those kinds of things, but you also recognize that you have to have a balance too.
Thank you. I also noticed that, and especially the people I know that are on the call today, is that we're part of caregiving is that we're very physical and we show love and compassion through hugs, and that's no one knows exactly what to do with that at all.
Yes.
Endorphin release that we get from hugging from someone, but able to give that. So do you have any advice of those of us that our love language is physical touch of how do we build that into this grief model, and how do we deal with that foreseeable future of not even be able to have that physical touch with people?
Yeah, I can tell you that, like, working in the funeral home and recognizing that, you know, people, you know, I had a family not too long ago that had a tragic death, and I knew the family from a long time ago, and there was nothing more that I wanted to do than to hug that family, and I literally had to have my hands behind my back so that I wouldn't, which feels really impersonal. But I also think that people, I feel like we're having to stretch ourselves and recognize that empathy comes from our face, empathy comes from our eyes. Empathy comes in our body language, in the sense that I wasn't like standing at a soldier attention, but I wanted so badly to hug them that I knew that if I had my hands, it was almost like I had myself in handcuffs because I just knew I shouldn't. But I think that that's a really difficult thing right now for a lot of people, and I think we're all gonna kind of have to stretch in that area and recognize that there are other ways that we can show empathy and other ways that we can be authentic. But I do know that I am hugging on my kids and the people that are, you know, within my home. I've been much more touchy-feely with them. Not that I wasn't before, but because I'm craving that. I'm craving that. It would be nothing for me to walk up to a friend and rub their back. I don't do any of that right now. And that is a really hard thing. That's a hard thing. So in the meantime, we have to figure out ways just to keep everybody safe, ways to convey that empathy and that love in different ways. We're all having to stretch a bit.
I think when you mentioned that had the drawing of the circles, there was a pet in there.
Yeah.
Like we all need a Smokey right now.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I have been literally, my pets have been a source of support for sure right now. Yeah.
I have one more question, and so we will be wrapping up soon. So if you have questions that you want to go ahead and put in the Q&A, now would be the time to do that. So this again is going back to the substance use disorder. Do you have any tips on how I can be a resilient caregiver and avoid fatigue while also in recovery from substance use disorder and the people that I'm trying to care for as well? My
goodness, that's, first of all, what a question, right? Because I think that's a lot of us, whether it's substance abuse disorder or not, like we're dealing with having to take care of ourselves and take care of others. And that's really hard right now. So I think if we could just talk about how it's really important, again, to have those boundaries and to make sure that we're not taking on more than we should, that we're, creating a bubble around ourselves, like an insulation. And yet, I think the one thing that actually on the webinar chat, and I'm not really great at multitasking, Chris, I'll have to tell you this, but like Katie Lynn said that verbalizing a hug is really helpful. And I think that answers this question too. There's a lot of times that we say, you know what, I really would like to hug you right now. I wish I could. And I think that there's, times where we do that in our caretaking too. Like, I would really like to do this for you, but I can't right now. And I hope that you recognize my heart. And that's, hopefully that causes the one that's needing caretaking to rise up and build true resilience, like what we're talking about. And also it helps us be stronger and recognize that maybe there was some codependency there before, but now we're actually truly caretaking not only them but ourselves.
Well, talking about multitasking, I'm trying to look at the chat on my phone, but then I've been writing down all these things that you shared today, and I just know that what resonated from just one of the first things that you said was the post-traumatic growth, and that we are going to come out of the other side of this. And as caregivers, people are going to be looking to us to lead the way, and so to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, making sure that we are building up those healthy boundaries. And helping people recognize our hearts is really helpful. So, Kristen, is there any last minute things that you want to share with us?
Well, I was going to share there we go. We have this last quote that I think is a great way to close. The reality is that you will grieve forever. You will not get over this loss. You will learn to live with it. You will heal, and you will build yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole again, but you will never be the same. And I love, that's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I love that. I think it's so pertinent to what we're dealing with right now, that I don't think our world is going to go back to the way it was. And I think we're all suffering greatly because of that. But we will be whole again. We will find joy. We will figure this out because we're resilient people. But we won't ever be the same, and that's okay.
Excellent. Well, I'm getting choked up and verklempt myself. So, but I do want to thank BJC St. Peter's and Progress West, the Economic Development Center of St. Charles County, SSM of St. Charles County, Mercy Health, and St. Luke's for their support at Community Strong, and for our partners at Baue Funeral Home for sharing Kristen with us today. I also want to thank our event ambassadors for this event. So Chief Skip Stevens from Cotterville Fire District, Teresa Daly from BJC St. Peter's, Lisa Cassidy from St. Charles County Ambulance District, Kyle Gaines from St. Charles County Ambulance District, Shelley Barr from KSLQ, Tammy Hempton from Breeze Park, Captain Doug Rains from Central County Fire Protection, Barb Griffith from Community Living, and Kelly Kirk from Compass Health. So if you could, Kristen, stop sharing your screen so I can just throw up.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
There we go. So please ask you to join us for our last webinar that will happen in 2 weeks on May 21st. And it will tie very closely into what Kristen was talking about, that this is kind of dealing with our grief now, but looking forward and recognizing who our future selves will be and how we need, what resiliency will look like in the future. And so we'd also ask you to consider subscribing to our newsletter at www.communitystrongscc.org. And until then, we just ask you to take one step closer to a healthier you and a healthier community. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Carissa.
And then we also have a question for future washing, about to type this out, but I'll say it, that yes, we will be sending emails out to the attendees, I believe, when they're available on our YouTube channel.